Welcome, everybody. My name is Dean Pierce. Sorry to the speakers for having my back to you for just a few moments. My name is Dean Pierce. I work at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. I have some notes here that I'm going to use while I take you through a couple of slides. First, many of you probably know what the Regional Planning Commission is, but some of you might not. One question is, why did we plan this event? The Northwest Regional Planning Commission has been around for, I think it's our 50th or 51st year. And our role is really as an interface between municipalities and the state. Our region is made up of 23 municipalities in Franklin and Grand Isle County. And we also wear a particular hat, which is something called a clean water service provider, which means we do a lot of projects that are meant to improve conditions in Lake Champlain. We are interested in this topic, as many of you are, for some different reasons, including the ones that I just gave. No one can read this slide, but when I should have said, all of the materials, the presentations will be available online. You'll be able to click the link if you use your phone with that QR code, or if you go to the Regional Planning Commission's website and you just type in the words 3 acre, it will take you to the page where you can click the link and it will take you to all of the materials for this. And they're not there yet, but they will be there. One of the things that we will include is a list of all of the communities or properties that are subject to the 3 acre. Maddie crunched some numbers, and I think it's 77 total permitted sites. And the total impervious acre, total impervious surface area where if rain hits the ground and things could run off, is in excess of 500 acres. So it's a lot of territory, and it's a lot of properties, a lot of developments, a lot of folks who are affected by this. We have an expert panel for you tonight. We realize this is an issue for folks. One of the things that we can do is to help get information out to folks. One way to do that is with an expert panel. They're listed here on this slide, but I'm just going to say a little bit more. Terry Purcell, Brody Henke, and Kevin Burke are all from Vermont P.E.G, and I'm going to apologize for abbreviations that I used. Department of Environmental Conservation. They're from the stormwater program at DEC. And in some combination, I'm not sure everybody is going to speak to the slides, but they will at least all be available to answer questions. And they're going to be able to talk to you about DEC's perspective on the 3 acre permit from the regulation side and what the requirements are. So those are the first folks. And after Terry, Brody, and Kevin, will come Gianna. And I have had the good fortune to work with Gianna. Her programs interface with a lot of the work that I do. So she is also in the Department of Environmental Conservation, and she is responsible for the design and oversight of funding opportunities available through something called the Clean Water and Initiative Program. That's not all she does, but it's one thing that she does. It intersects with this. And I know that she's good with numbers and can also explain policy. So you'll be fortunate to hear from Gianna. We also will be providing you with an opportunity to hear from Andrea Poulos, who is an engineer for the firm that I still think of as Dell Consulting Engineers, which then became TPC, which is now TCE, which is a division of another company, but she will explain that. And she has managed many different 3 acre projects since the advent of the requirement. So she will have valuable perspective. And then last but not least, we have Dave Wheeler, who's from the city of South Burlington. And Dave has been with the city for 10 years, and he was working for in the consulting field before that. And he can help provide answers to questions that have to do with what municipal rules are or could be. So the plan is for you to hear the 4 presentations, each lasting about a dozen minutes. And we want to save as much time as we can for questions and answers. So I think that's valuable.
Right, we're getting some comments in the chat that your voice is on hold. So all the mics that
I gotta get closer. Okay, well, sit down. So no disrespect, and that's probably going to help things. Maybe they can confirm that. My apologies. Hopefully that the people from Northwest Access can clean that up in post. So 4 presentations. We'll be starting with Terry, Brody, and Kevin. Then we'll turn to Gianna, followed by Andrea and Dave. Like I said, there will be copies, so a copy of the presentation available online. And we hope, I had a note, we hope it's possible for everyone online to hear what is said. And we've learned that they couldn't, at least when I wasn't standing close enough to the mic. The Q&A is going to follow. We have given people slips of paper if you wanted to write questions down. We're going to try to just, while we thought it would be a good idea, if people had ideas, they could just pass them. Sadie is going to take the questions from in the room, and you're going to take the questions from online. We just want to keep things simple in part because some of the questions may be similar and we can ask similar questions today. I think I have spoken long enough. So without further ado, I think I will turn things over to you gentlemen here in the middle.
Sure, I'll introduce myself first. So with Vermont DEC, I am the program manager for the Stormwater Management Program. I've worked in the program for over 17 years. Mostly worked in lakes and ponds and some other regulatory programs in my time there, but the 3-acre requirements are complicated, so we're glad to be here to answer questions and help you. Oh.
Yeah, also, yeah.
Sorry.
Are all these mics like live and they're all on? Great. Sure. Hey, everybody. My name's Brody Hankey. I'm the newest member of the operational stormwater permitting team, but I am the person that covers this region. So if you go look up at the map of all the different districts that are covered, you'll see my name covering Franklin County, as well as Grand Isle County, Orleans County, and Northern Chittenden County, and Essex County. So like I said, I just joined the stormwater program in January, but I've been working in water quality in Vermont for over 8 years now. Previously, actually, I was working out of the USDA office in St. Albans, and was with the Agency of Agriculture for 2 years as well. So, thanks.
And I'm Terry Purcell. I'm the operational section supervisor in the stormwater program. I've been with the program for nearly 8 years. I supervise 5 analysts in our program. And our section does focus on operational permitting, which is the category of permit under which these 3-acre sites fall. These are permits for stormwater discharges from impervious surfaces.
Yes.
Introducing me first. So we can go to the. Thank you. So as a basis for this, the Lake Champlain TMDL is important to understand. So TMDL stands for total maximum daily load, and that is essentially a pollution budget for Lake Champlain that was issued in 2016 by the EPA. And the focus here is addressing excess phosphorus that causes algae blooms. You can see the watershed there. You know that some of it is in New York State. And you can see, though, that there's a very large portion of it in Vermont, but not the entire state. So the 3-acre requirements apply currently to sites that are within the Lake Champlain Basin, as well as Lake Memphremagog in that watershed, and as well as stormwater impaired waters. The rest of the state has until 2033 to meet the 3-acre requirement. So just to be clear, this does apply to the entire state, any 3-acre sites in Vermont. And you can see this pie chart of the different sectors of the TMDL. And these are agriculture, developed lands, wastewater, forest, and stream bank. So stream bank is stream bank erosion. Forestry is generally forestry operations, logging. Developed lands is the sector that we're focused on here for stormwater runoff. That's at 18%, wastewater at 4%, agriculture at 41%. So the TMDL does require reductions from all of these sectors. The TMDL is not just focused on 3-acre sites or developed lands, but we see that 18%, and that's an impetus for the regulations that apply to developed lands, which do include more than just 3-acre sites. They include requirements for municipal roads, for state roads, and for certain other types of developed lands. The reduction here is noted of 213 metric tons of phosphorus per year. So we do have specific numbers noted here about what the goals are and what will need to be done to reduce the phosphorus to get to where we need to get to. So I mentioned municipal roads. We do have a municipal roads general permit, also called the MRGP. So that requires what are essentially erosion reduction measures that are implemented for town roads. The MS4 general permit has phosphorus control plans for larger municipalities, South Burlington, Burlington. There are many in Chittenden County. It also includes some municipal roads requirements. There's the TS4 that I had mentioned, which includes phosphorus control plans for VTrans. And then we have the 3-acre permitting requirements, which apply to a broad category of projects. It can be a school, it could be a private development, it could be even a quarry. It's really just based on wherever there's a site that meets the definition of an impervious surface of 3 or more acres. So a little bit on a timeline here. Act 64, the Vermont Clean Water Act, was adopted in 2015. This amended state statute, and the statute here for stormwater that we're talking about is 10 VSA 1264. And the statute requires 3-acre permitting by 2023. So there were regulatory deadlines that were set in motion in 2015. The statute directed A&R to develop administrative rules to set standards for 3-acre permitting. So the stormwater rule was adopted in 2019, and then following that, General Permit 39050 in 2020. So there was an increasing level of detail in terms of spelling out the requirements and the regulatory due dates as we progress from statute to rule to the general permit. And so what was the purpose of Act 64? It was to provide legal tools, authority, and capacity to comply with these federal requirements to remediate significant phosphorus impairment in Lake Champlain. And importantly, more generally, to address impaired waters across the state and to prevent waters that are currently not impaired from becoming impaired. Generally, it's a lot more expensive, time-consuming, and challenging to, after the fact, address an impairment or an issue with pollution than it is to prevent it in the first place. So that's why when I mentioned the whole state, one of the purposes here is to implement stormwater improvements to prevent impairment of receiving waters in the first place. So Act 64 supported Vermont's regulatory obligations established under Section 303D of the Federal Clean Water Act. It expanded state authority to address surface water pollution, particularly polluted stormwater runoff. And Vermont is obligated by the Federal Clean Water Act to take steps necessary to restore impaired waters. So we do have a regulatory definition of a 3-acre site. And it's a 3-part definition. The simplest part is a single tract of land with 3 or more acres of impervious surface that either had no operational stormwater permit or a pre-2002 permit. Generally, our requirements for stormwater at the state level increased substantially in 2002. We had a new manual at that time. So we use that as a cutoff point here to not require upgrades for sites that had the more modern and effective stormwater treatment. And that was the cutoff at 2002 when our manual was adopted. And we do currently have a newer manual that replaced the 2002 manual. The second part of the definition is a multi-lot project with a pre-2002 stormwater permit for 3 or more acres of impervious surface. And then if you have adjacent impervious surfaces where it's part of a related operation, a good example is a college campus. It could also be a hospital. So you have these little smaller parcels perhaps that aren't, they don't have 3 acres of impervious, but they're clearly a part of the overall operation at the site. And this is just a picture there of the National Life Building where DEC is based. That is a 3-acre site. 3-acre sites include state buildings as well, including some in Montpelier. So state parks as well. So it's pretty broad in terms of what it encompasses. And there are approximately 700 sites in the Lake Champlain Basin and approximately 6,000 acres of impervious surfaces. It's a link to our department's website for more information. So in terms of the timeline of how this came into action, our department standpoint, we contacted, first we identified the 3-acre sites, and once we had a list of those that we thought were 3-acre sites, we contacted property owners and permittees. We sent letters in 2019 and then in 2020 to provide an opportunity to comment. It was a comment period on the permit and to also inform landowners if they were a 3-acre site. We did then allow for what we called initial NOIs, which provided a short-term 18-month authorization. This was intended to enable people to get in the door with permit coverage fairly quickly. So the application requirements were very simple and basic. We required a delineation of the impervious surfaces and mostly more administrative notice of intent type content. There were no design plans, no engineering feasibility analysis required for that. And once that 18 months was up, the full application was due, meaning your design plans, all necessary application materials, engineering feasibility analysis. And the authorization for that full NOI is valid for a 5-year term. So who needs to apply for the permit? So the general permit states that the applicant shall own the impervious surface for which permit coverage is required and the lands on which the stormwater system is located. So, if the applicant doesn't own the impervious or those lands on which the system is located, the owner still needs to be a co-applicant. So those are the parties that it would apply to. And the application process, a professional engineer is required to prepare the permit application. Application materials need to be submitted to our department with the required review fees or administrative fees. There's a period of administrative and technical review of the permit application to make sure it's complete and that it meets our standards and requirements. We may have comments for the engineer. We would copy the applicant on those as well, so they're aware there may be some changes that are needed. Ultimately, once we're okay with the application, we consider it complete. There is a public notice period, gives the public an opportunity to comment on the project or design plans. And following that notice period, if there are no comments, we would issue a permit with a 5-year permit term. If there are comments, that may lead to additional changes. But at the very least, we are required to respond to those. That's it, right? So just talking about treatment standards, basically what actually needs to be done here. So for 3-acre sites that discharge to receiving waters that are not impaired, and there is a list I mentioned earlier, the 303D, that's a federal list. And that's in reference to a statute, that has a list of stormwater impaired waters. Most of these projects don't discharge to impaired waters, but particularly in Chittenden County, there are more of them that do in the urban areas where there are more impaired waters. But most of these sites are subject to only what we call the redevelopment standard. This is treating 50% of water quality volume on the site. The water quality volume is the first 1 inch of runoff from sites and impervious surfaces. So basically, this equates usually to treating roughly half of your site. In recognition that these are built out sites where there wasn't necessarily a modern stormwater design in mind at the time, and there are challenges and feasibility constraints, the requirement is set lower than what it would have been had the development been proposed today. So these are examples of treatment practices from our manual that are or can potentially be used if feasible on these sites. This is not a permit that requires one system for every site. Sites can vary tremendously in terms of soils, and all sorts of feasibility constraints. But these are examples of some of the treatment practices that may need to be implemented. So for stormwater impaired waters, and I note here that Stevens and Rugbrook in St. Albans are stormwater impaired. There are additional standards, and the channel protection standard is really the key one that applies to most of these, in addition to the redevelopment standard. The reason for that is these waters in urban areas often have a great deal of scour and erosion. The flow of water is often a major problem, in addition to the pollutant load. So the channel protection standard will essentially require holding back that water and retaining it on the site so that it's not all shooting out at one time during the storm event and really scouring out and eroding the stream bed. So this is that additional standard that is applicable to assist these impaired waters in getting to a state where they're no longer in this poor condition. So a really important part of this whole process for 3-acre sites is the engineering feasibility analysis. There are certain things that don't need to be done in order to meet these requirements. An engineer does need to demonstrate that these apply to the site, but you don't need to purchase additional land. You don't need to pump stormwater uphill. You don't need to violate local, state, or federal regulations, which would include constructing floodplains or wetlands. You do need to consider the feasibility of underground treatment if feasible, but not, if that action would permanently preclude the existing land use. In other words, you've got a parking lot that you need and you use, and putting in an underground system would mean that you could no longer use that area for parking. That's not something that's required as part of it. But if there would need to be just a temporary removal of that surface, and then it could be restored to what it had been used for underground treatment. That would be expected, like, again, unless there were other feasibility constraints, there can be utilities underground piping networks. That could be issues with feasibility. And so what happens if you don't have feasibility to fully meet the standard or standards? So that's where the impact fees come into play, and impact fees were put into the requirements to make sure that we didn't have too many sites that couldn't meet the standards, and therefore we wouldn't get to the pollutant reduction targets. So the impact fees go into funds for specific watersheds, and then projects that are able to exceed standards, meaning to go above and beyond. I mentioned that 50%. If you can get to 85% treatment, then you should be eligible in most cases to receive some of this money that was paid by others who couldn't meet standards. So the goal here again is to get to where we need to get to, and the impact fees provide a mechanism for that. For the redevelopment standard, the maximum impact fee is $12,500 per acre. And that's because the water quality volume treatment standard impact fee was set at 25,000 per acre. And the redevelopment standard is half the water quality treatment standard. So we end up with, if nothing can be done, that's the maximum. It's not always going to be that 12,500. If you can get a certain percentage of treatment in on your site, you wouldn't pay that maximum necessarily. But that is what it would be per acre of impervious surface if nothing could be done to the site. So that's it for my presentation. I did want to keep that pretty short and basic. And leave plenty of room for questions.
We're gonna try this. I just wanted to know that all actually happened. Notice of their
Yes, correct. Sorry about that. Notice of intent.
Great. Hi, thank you, Terry, and thank you, Northwest Regional Planning Commission and the town of St. Albans for hosting us this evening. My name is Gianna Petito. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for the Clean Water Initiative program. So that's in the Water Investment Division, just a slightly different division from my colleagues over here. I'm going to be talking today about a brief overview of some of the funding that has been available through the Department of Environmental Conservation, specifically to support 3-acre permit obtainment and construction funding. So, yep. You got it. You can read me. Next slide. So this is the outline of what we'll talk through. I'll just do really briefly, who is the Clean Water Initiative Program? Why am I even here chatting with you? I'll give you a history of the Vermont's commitments to clean water. I'll talk about ARPA and 3-acre funding programs that have been available. I'll talk about what's next after ARPA, and then wrap up with some takeaways and resources. So bear with me. It might feel a little bit like a roundabout conversation, but I'm hoping it'll come full circle in the end. So this is the Clean Water Initiative program. We're just really jazzed about cleaning up a floodplain, which is why we're all super messy. But we are part of the bureaucratic alphabet soup. We are in WID, DEC, ANR. On the left side of the screen is the 3 pillars of our mission for our program. So we try to work to align and coordinate clean water efforts. We work to develop the financial and technical resources to implement projects and sustain them over time. And then we work to capture, assess, and communicate the progress of that work back to the public and back to the legislature. So my specific role kind of falls in the green and blue areas of our program. So I do provide some staff support. I don't know how close to be to this. I provide some staff support to what's called the Clean Water Board. They do an annual clean water budgeting process, and I'll talk a bit more about that today. And that helps sort of align statewide a lot of the agency's initiatives around clean water. And then some of that funding comes to the Clean Water Initiative program to administer. And so part of my role is to package those dollars into funding opportunities that might turn into grants or contracts, et cetera. So that's why I'm here to chat with you. So talking about Vermont's commitments to clean water, my colleague Terry had talked a little bit about Vermont Clean Water Act, Act 64 of 2015. So hopefully you got the gist that we have to reduce pollution to clean up Lake Champlain. We've got this fancy thing called the TMDL we have to get there too. And back in 2015, we were all really jazzed about passing Act 64 to make a lot of commitments to get there. So Act 64 included a ton of regulations. You heard a lot about the stormwater ones, but there were also regulations put on ag land, on forestry, et cetera. So it did a lot in that space. What it also did, though, was launch the Clean Water Board and the Clean Water Fund. So it created this decision-making body that made some recommendations about how to spend money to do some of these things. And so that's really critical. I'm going to come back to that in just a little bit. So while it did accomplish a lot, it left a lot of questions on the table for the State House and for everyone, really. Great, we've made all of these commitments. We're going to put all these rules and regulations into place, but how are we going to pay for them? And what's that going to cost us? So after Act 64, the legislature asked the Treasurer's Office to tell them to calculate what the costs might be and what the state's commitment or share of those costs should be. So there's some research and there's some reports, and where we got to was Act 76 of 2019. So 4 years later, the treasurer had come back, had provided this report of what these costs might be and what the state share could be, and made some recommendations about how to meet those costs. So Act 76 kind of built on Vermont's Clean Water Act. One of the coolest things it did is it set a floor commitment that the state would annually provide a funding of in the area of $50 to $60 million a year to fund some of the stuff to support our clean water goals statewide. It added an additional revenue source to this clean water fund, this pot of money, to make sure that it was large enough and sustainable enough in the long term that we could really rely on it to provide a state share and support offset some of the costs of compliance for folks. It reorganized what the board should prioritize and set some priorities for them when they were building their annual budget. And it launched 4 new grant programs, including 2 in red, which are kind of relevant for today, including the municipal stormwater grants and the developed lands implementation grants. So those 2 at the bottom, the intent of those are to help public and private, respectively, come into compliance with their regulations, particularly stormwater regulations. So we have in statute grant programs that are supposed to help folks with meeting their regulatory obligations. I will come back to that. So that was the state's commitment. That was 2019. And then we probably all remember what happened in 2020. Unfortunately, COVID hit. But fortunately, after COVID, we had the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, that was passed at the federal level, and it was intended to help with federal recovery in response to, it was an economic stimulus in response to COVID. So ARPA was passed and states were given leeway in how they were going to spend their ARPA money. And as you can see, Vermont received quite a substantial amount of ARPA money, 100 million of which the General Assembly said this should go towards clean water. And of that 100 million, 36 million specifically needs to support 3-acre stormwater work. So while we had, coming out of 2015 with our Clean Water Act and 2019 with another Act 76, we had this momentum and interest in funding and committing to supporting water quality goals. Now we had this huge stimulus bill and federal money. So there was suddenly like a shift in how are we going to take advantage of this federal money? And let's do that quickly. So the state really prioritized 3-acre work, as you can see, by providing a good chunk of the money towards it. Because they realized there's so many sites, over 700 sites, so many different landowners with really disparate abilities to meet the cost of compliance. So we thought this is our time. We're having this one-time federal stimulus. Let's put it towards 3-acre. Actually, go back to that one. So while it was a nice and large amount of money, it came with some strings attached. Unsurprisingly, ARPA money had pretty strict deadlines. All of the money had to be tied up in a contract, a grant, an award letter by today, September 30th, 2024. And all of it has to be completely spent down exactly 2 years from now, September 30th, 2026, or the money goes away, gets clawed back. So one of the tasks of the Agency of Natural Resources in being assigned this money was to think about what kinds of projects can best take advantage of this money right now and meet these tight timelines. Thank you. So the $36 million that eventually got assigned to my program, the Clean Water Initiative program, to help move out onto the ground in partnership with our regulatory folks and our business office, et cetera. So I have on this slide the different offerings that were made available through the Clean Water Initiative program, specifically to support 3-acre. In addition to the $36 million that came through American Rescue Plan Act, our program also received money from the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, largely to support that top initiative called the Green Schools Initiative. So the exact money was a moving target for quite a while. Sometimes the money moved between those initiatives. We're hoping for some more Environmental Protection Agency money to go to green schools pretty soon. And programs outside of the Clean Water Initiative also spent some money that supported 3-acre, but we don't have an exact tally. So really the big picture takeaway to provide you here is we've moved about $56 million in the last couple of years to support 3-acre compliance. And I'm just going to run through what these programs have been for you all. The top one is called the Green Schools Initiative. So that was providing engineering services and construction costs for all the 3-acre public schools. I think 62, 65 public schools across the Lake Champlain and Lake Magog Basin. The next one down is providing engineering services and construction support to manufactured housing communities across these basins. The third one down is the Permit Obtainment Assistance Program. This was probably our generalist program, the one that was most widely available to pretty much every 3-acre site, could get up to $50,000 to cover the permitting expenses, the engineering feasibility analysis, all the permitting costs, impact fees, if you needed to pay impact fees, et cetera. The public-private partnership is a collection of just 7 grants to 7 different communities for 7 very specific projects that kind of highlighted the partnership between the town and that private site, kind of showing maybe they might be co-permittees on the site, or maybe there was an additional public benefit. And so they partnered, received this grant to do, again, it's a 3-acre site. So again, to bring them into compliance with the stormwater regulations. And then there was some funding that's been provided to 3-acre agricultural fairs, again, to help with them with their permitting and construction cost offset. So I think that gives you just like a summary of what has been available. It's useful to flag that all of these are really trailed to the regulatory deadlines. You know, the regulation, as you saw, started in 2015, then there was the rule, then the general permit. And this funding really got off the ground once ARPA hit. And so we kind of had to catch up a little bit. I think the funding did help a lot of these sites come into compliance with the permitting deadlines, but we recognize there's still a huge gap, and particularly in the construction assistance space, we had the permit obtainment assistance that really just helped people with the permitting costs. And that construction piece is still a very known and recognized gap in terms of assistance. Next slide. So all of these are all these programs are fully invested at this point in terms of it's assigned into contracts or grants, as today was the deadline that I had to be there. And because we had to meet those strict time-bound requirements. And so now that that's mostly encumbered, you know, the conversation at the agency right now is what's next? How do we continue to provide funding and financing support? We're in a transition period, so I admit these aren't great answers for you right now, but I want to let you know what some options are now and what some options might be in the future for you and how you can speak to that need. Some communities have turned to the congressional delegation to support direct appropriation. So that doesn't come through our shop. You would call up our representatives to the U.S. Congress. I'm not a strong expert in this, but I did provide a link to resources about that. And Dean, when you share the slides, you'll be able to direct link to that. But that basically gets directly appropriated through the federal budget to certain communities through an application process. You do have to be a municipality or a nonprofit to apply through that. But I've seen that happen with 3-acre sites accessing CDS, what's called CDS funding. Some folks have explored other non-state grants. For example, the Lake Champlain Basin Program does hold annual rounds for implementation grants. They have funded 3-acre in the past. I think this year they're not funding regulatory work, but they might in the future. So there's other grants to explore. All of these are Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund eligible. That is a separate program in our division. So again, I'm not an expert in it, but I'm providing links to learn more about it. By statute, you can apply as an individual or as a municipality. By statute, the municipalities have to be prioritized. So it's certainly beneficial to kind of go in with the municipality so they sponsor your application, or hopefully if they're like a co-permittee on the site, that's helpful too. And lastly, why I started with what happened before ARPA is I want to go back to that. We still have in statute that the municipal stormwater implementation grants and the developed land implementation grants should be priorities for funding for the Clean Water Board. And so they'd annually develop their budget, and part of that budget process is soliciting public comment. So I bring this up now because in about a month, in less than a month, next slide, thank you. In less than a month, they're going to launch their state fiscal year 2026 budgeting cycle. State fiscal year 2026 starts next July 2025. I don't know why we do it like this, but we do. And they will review a draft budget, and then they're going to put it out for what's called a public comment period. And so this slide provides some information how you guys can provide comment to the board about what grant programs matter to you and where you would like to see them prioritize funding. So you can sign up. The second bullet down is the Clean Water Stakeholders Listserv. We do a whole announcement once the public comment period is live. You'll be able to come to a public hearing if you want to. The board is there and will listen. You can submit emails with your comments, or you can fill out a questionnaire that we'll have posted live once the public comment period is open. So to wrap up with some key takeaways, roughly 56 million has been invested through the state to offset the cost of compliance for 3-acre sites. The Clean Water Initiative Program does administer multiple different sets of programming for 3-acre, but these have largely been funded with ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And so they're mostly fully encumbered or fully committed at this point. If sites are interested in more financial assistance, certainly recommend pursuing congressional delegation assistance. There might be some other grant assistance available. The Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund these projects are eligible for that. And we strongly encourage participating in the Clean Water Board budgeting process and communicating those needs, since they do exist as a priority in statute for you all. Put more resources in here just as follow-up, but that is it. Thank you.
The next speaker is going to be appearing remotely, so I think what I'm just going to do is let her advance her own slide. Andrea, are you there? And do you want to handle your own slide?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Let me know if I need to speak up at any point. I can handle my slides if that's easier, or I'm happy to have you do it.
I can do that. Well, you handle them. I think it'll be a little bit easier.
A lot of people here would be interested. Obviously, all the time.
We ready to go? So my name's Andrea Poulis. I work for a private engineering firm out of Williston called TCE. We did recently get acquired by Bowman Company, which is a nationwide firm. So we're currently TCE, a Bowman Company, but it's a relatively small firm of about 30 surveyors, ecologists, and engineers out of Williston, Vermont. I am a licensed professional engineer. I do a handful of different types of civil engineering, but stormwater has definitely been my bread and butter. And 3 Acre specifically has been a bulk of my work through the past few years since the regulations went into place. So I'm just going to provide an overview of what a consulting engineer will typically provide you once you get into hiring an engineer to help with the stormwater application. So we usually start with some pretty detailed research into the specific site. We can do survey and environmental assessments. We'll start to provide your engineering feasibility analysis that Terry spoke about. We get into actual treatment design, preparing plans, the permit application process, and then there are other permitting requirements and the construction phase. I think my big message to this group as a consulting engineer is that these projects are not just stormwater treatment. Anytime you go in and disturb a site, we need to make sure that we're also complying with all of the other state regulations. So if you're familiar with development projects, that's not new to you, but if you aren't a developer, that may be new news. And every project is unique. I just pulled 2 pictures of some sites in St. Albans. Some of these sites are multiple properties. They're fully built out. There's not a lot of green space for treatment. They may have never had an existing stormwater permit, whereas other sites have a long history of stormwater permitting. They may have had a permit issued pre-2002 and then some permits issued after the 2002 requirements. And some places have green space, but a lot of them don't. And a lot of that green space is often constrained either by wetlands or open space requirements from local permitting. So we start every project looking at your site, trying to figure out, the big takeaways of, is there a lot of permitting history? Is there an Act 250 permit? What do our local permits look like? And what kind of environmental constraints do we have? We typically start, if we think that there's wetlands on the property, we're probably going to start with a wetland delineation. I'll get into this a little bit later, but essentially wetlands and their 50-foot buffers are protected under state law. There is an application process to impact them. However, it's written into the 3-acre rules that the state cannot force you to provide treatment in a wetland or buffer. But we also do the topographic survey. We'll locate utilities. There's separation requirements between sewer lines and water lines and existing sewer treatment. And if there is Act 250, we may be looking at a whole slew of other environmental constraints, rare, threatened and endangered plants, stream setbacks, river corridors, deer wintering, and habitat blocks. So if you have Act 250 on your site, it's a little bit different of a ball game than if there's no Act 250. I'm happy to talk more about that if people have questions. Terry spoke about the engineering feasibility analysis, and he mentioned the definition of a impervious surface of 3 or more acres. I think it was a good overview, but we definitely start, diving into any permit history to make sure that we have the impervious surfaces delineated and that are subject to these regulations. Again, we're gonna evaluate site constraints and then start to look at treatment areas and discuss those with you. You know, there's always anecdotal information that may preclude somewhere from having treatment. And Terry also spoke about the maximization feasibility information, but there's a slew of things that you won't be required to do to install treatment. And I'm happy to talk about any of those in more detail. Once we do identify an area for treatment, we start getting into the more heavy engineering side, doing modeling to determine where impervious areas flow. I think in an ideal situation, we're going to collect stormwater where it currently flows and provide treatment in that location. That's not always feasible, so we may have to put in new swales and new catch basins to direct stormwater to an area where treatment can be provided. We need to do soils test pits, potentially infiltration testing, and then we actually model, design the system, create plans, create supporting details, and there's a long list of supporting materials that go into every state stormwater application. This is just a list of what actually goes into a full 9050 application. So it's the engineering feasibility analysis, design narrative, workbooks and worksheets to explain how our designs meet the state regulations, modeling to support our treatment design, and then the design plans. And Terry talked about the review process, but once we get through all of our initial analysis, survey, environmental studies, and get the design done, it gets submitted to the state, and then you're in the state's hands for a little bit. Goes through a few technical and administrative review processes. There's usually some comments from the state and revision to the application. And then you get a permit issued for 5 years. We typically get the stormwater permits first and then go in for local permits and Act 250 permits. It can be done at the same time. I think there is some leniency with municipalities and with Act 250 because this is a state mandated project. It's not just new development. So we typically get our stormwater permit, having everything else in the back of our mind, and then start to get into local and Act 250 permitting during this 5-year period. Because you have 5 years once the permit is issued to actually construct your system. So once you have all of your permits that you need to have prior to going to construction, I think every site is unique. In an ideal situation, the engineers are also involved in the construction process. We can provide stakeout of the stormwater system to make sure it gets built in the right place and the right size. Ideally, we're doing some periodic observation to make sure that the system is getting constructed properly. All of that is to support our engineer's initial statement of compliance, which will need to go in once the system is complete. It's one of the permit requirements. And then there is also permit requirements for annual inspections, which usually comes with a maintenance list. So I just want to stress, yes, there's a one-time requirement to meet these regulations. It does affect all of your other permits that you may have on the site, whether it be local or Act 250. And then there is considerations for construction and maintenance of the system into the future. I did see a question in the chat about the stormwater impact fee and whether that was one time. That is a one-time fee payment to the state. So it's a pretty different process getting a new permit versus paying that impact fee. That's my really brief overview. Happy to go into any detail about it.
Thank you, Andrea. We're going to recapture the sharing here. Sure, Carl.
One group would be that's especially in Europe. This plan is something that group that has people together and getting involved. They come along pretty distance. And follow. Is how do we, these people that don't have one of these. I see always like linkage between how these people get something done. But as far as I understand, the individual, it has be there. That's where I think really come in and maybe. What's the thing that you would suggest or that you would say to get these projects?
With that, a proverbial parking lot, we'll just say briefly that we, in our office, we're hopeful that we might get an attorney on the panel. It didn't work out, but some of what you're referring to does seem like the kind of territory, but we'll pass things on to Dave. Yeah, I think.
Yep. Dave Wheeler, Water Resources Engineer for the City of South Burlington. So I've been with the city for just about 10 years now. I started as the Assistant Stormwater Superintendent and have been primarily focused on stormwater work. So South Burlington, we are different. We're 20,000 residents strong. We have a lot of impervious surface. We've got the airport, we've got the mall, we've got portions of UVM. And additionally, we have stormwater impaired streams. So this map here, those pink shaded areas are our stormwater impaired streams. So in addition to the Lake Champlain TMDL that you are all dealing with, we have our own additional TMDLs for our streams that went into effect about 20 years ago. So, one message I want to convey is this isn't new, this struggle. We went through it 20 years ago with our stormwater impaired streams, where we had a bunch of neighborhoods with expired permits that suddenly had to come into compliance with new state regulations. In the early 2000s, there were homeowners associations with expired permits in these impaired watersheds where they're having difficulty selling their homes. There's also issues where the state couldn't issue new permits for new development, so construction was coming to a halt. This news article here is from 20 years ago. You could essentially reprint it today with minor tweaks and it would feel current. Next slide. Yeah, another article here. We've got I could read it. Yeah, it was on my computer right in front of me. But basically, at that time, we had Howard Dean going on Vermont Public Radio talking about these impaired streams, how they weren't really that bad. They weren't, the state was not acknowledging the poor water quality in the streams. They were, in a way, kind of fighting back against the EPA. And Conservation Law Foundation is a group of environmental kind of lawyers that push municipalities and the state to come into compliance with water quality laws. And the state was kind of pushing back in a way. And again, we had Howard Dean saying he had canoed up some of these impaired streams. I certainly couldn't imagine throwing a canoe in by the Hannafords, going under, 89 and up around through the mall and claiming he camped out and cooked with water. I don't know if it would help to sit closer or if it's a proximity thing. So in around 2001, the Vermont Water Resources Board ruled that there will be no new discharges to these impaired waters. So the state couldn't issue new permits until they came up with plans for these improvements like the Lake Champlain TMDL. But they had this other plan at the time, watershed improvement plans or WIPs, which the environmentalists reviewed and said they weren't good enough. So there was a battle there, and some of these WIPs were struck down. Next slide. The Conservation Law Foundation petitioned A&R, these guys, to require NIPD's permits for those existing discharges into impaired waters. A&R denied the petition. The Water Resources Board reversed the denial. A&R filed a motion against the Water Resources Board that went to the Vermont State Supreme Court. So a lot of back and forth, a lot of fighting, a lot of debating over whether stormwater treatment was effective. Next slide. But ultimately, the state came back with TMDLs for the stream. The EPA approved them, and unlike the WIPs, the TMDLs cannot be appealed. So that is the work that I am currently working on. Since about 2006, we began building these stormwater treatment practices in South Burlington. We have a deadline of 2032. We have over 100 of these projects identified in South Burlington. And so we're just chugging along. This is an interesting article. It's by Ernie Pomerleau, who's a significant landowner in the state. And the gist of it is like, let's stop fighting. Let's stop paying the lawyers. Let's start paying the engineers. Let's clean up the lake. Let's clean up the water. So that was an interesting article. I don't know if it's aged well or not. So flash forward to 2015, as was already said, the passage of Act 64, the Vermont Clean Water Act, kind of expanded this problem to the Lake Champlain watershed. The 9050 permit came out with a 3-acre rule. So now it's not just folks with an expired permit, but it's folks with 3 acres of impervious surface or more are essentially being treated in a very similar way to these other expired permit holders. So a repeat of the confusion and objections from those who are impacted. So in South Burlington for the past 20 or so years, we've been assisting folks, neighborhoods. Typically, we work with homeowners associations. A lot of our developments are just kind of standard. It was an old farm field. Now it's 100 homes. There's an HOA, and those are really easy situations to deal with. We have, I can think of 3 or 4 special assessment districts that we established. So in those cases, they did not want to form an HOA. And there's a mechanism, a special assessment district. It's like a tax area you can establish by a vote. So you have to put it to the voters. I believe it got approved with like an 80% positive vote. And it can only fund like the construction of a project. So you might have heard Andrea talking about engineering feasibility analysis. If you have like a lot of wetlands or other utilities that prohibit the construction of a stormwater project in your neighborhood, and you have to pay the impact fees, the special assessment district cannot be used to pay impact fees. It can only be used to pay for a pond or other similar, construction that benefits the neighborhood. And then we basically just bill those residents over time, 10 years or whatever's established to recoup the funds, again, without establishing an HOA. We also help obtain grant funding. Oftentimes, historically, the grants were only available to municipalities, so there's a lot of incentive and encouragement to work HOAs with municipalities. So then our staff, we hire the engineering firms, we manage them, we review the plans they come up with, make sure it fits into our plans. work through permitting issues, Act 250, wetland streams, floodplains, archaeology, historic preservation, local DRB review. There's kind of many redundant layers of permitting on these projects sometimes. And then we also obtain easements from landowners. And when a project is completed, the city will take over maintenance responsibility. So we need easements to do that maintenance. Next. During construction, we'll put the project out to bid, and following, the public bidding process, we'll hire the lowest responsive bidder. We'll either oversee construction or hire a construction inspector and manage that person. And then after construction, we offer maintenance of stormwater treatment practices that serve exclusively residential. So we don't maintain commercial properties. They usually have a higher aesthetic they're looking for, and they're usually already hiring a property maintenance company to take care of their facilities. Biggest challenges, so landowner coordination if no HOA. We're dealing with that right now. We've got a number of 3-acre sites where there's no HOA. And, we can do the special assessment district, but for at least one of them, doesn't look like there's much feasible. So if they have to pay an impact fee, there's really not a great mechanism unless they all just rally together to pay that fee. Like the stormwater mitigation fee, if you can't actually build the project because of impacts, whether it's utilities or other lack of land area, then you'll pay a fee to the state. And the idea is they use that money elsewhere to contribute to another project that can maybe do more than it needed to. And so you make up for it on the watershed scale. We certainly have uncertainty around construction funding. There's been a lot of funding for design so far. Site constraints. So there are a lot of ways to get out of doing the work. Then there's a lot of red tape and permitting and reporting associating with funding. Sometimes it takes a lot of work to just manage and report back on the work you're doing. And then kind of a lack of engineers and contractors available to do the work. There used to be, in general, more engineers, more contractors, so you would get more competitive bids when you put a project out for bid. What we're seeing now, sometimes like we put a project out for construction with one bid that came back, and similar for engineering design, we got 2 proposals when 5 years ago we would have gotten half a dozen. This is just a list of the current 3-acre projects in design in South Burlington that we are managing. And so some of these are like a single large commercial complex. One of them is like 300 housing units. Others are in the 50 to 100 homes. So a lot of work going on in South Burlington. And then these are a handful of non-3-acre stormwater projects that we are also moving forward currently. And then just some examples. So having worked with neighborhoods throughout the years, they were coming into compliance with the flow restoration plans for our streams. And by doing that, they actually came into compliance with the new 3-acre rule ahead of time. So Village at Dorset Park, we finished that in 2017. That project cost a little over $500,000. We got a grant to cover about half of the cost, $250,000. It would have been a 3-acre site, but it now meets the post 2002 treatment standard, and it had an expired state stormwater permit that we have now, once we finished the project, we rolled that permit under our MS4 permit. So that's the city's stormwater permit, and we can provide them with kind of umbrella coverage and shield them from the state putting additional requirements on that neighborhood. Same year, Stonehenge stormwater project, very similar project cost, a little over $500,000. We had grants from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That came with a lot of red tape. But another successful project where we rolled them under our MS4 permit, they would have been a 3-acre site, but they didn't have to deal with any of that. They were already good to go. This is a large gravel wetlands. Cost $767,000. We got grant funding for $400,000. There are 2 neighborhoods, 2 permitted areas that drain to this project. So, yeah, this is same year, 2017, just proactive work to some degree. Pinnacle at Spear, another neighborhood, $500,000. They had 4 different older pre-2002 stormwater ponds, so we had to bring them up to current standards. And we got 3 different grants for that totaled about $320,000. And they would have been a 3-acre site, expired stormwater permit as well. This is just a different kind of style of project. So chambers, underground chambers. You can see a small white chair under one of those chambers just for scale. I believe the rep from the company that sells these units said it was the largest subsurface chamber system installed in Vermont at that point in time. That cost about $700,000. And we got a grant from V-Trans for about $230,000. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Dave. See Dave's contact information. I know that I had.
Who pays the difference? I think you hear a lot of people. Assuming they're a lot bigger than anything.
Yeah.
Who pays the difference?
Yep. Great question. Yes, perfect. So about 20 years ago, we started the stormwater utility, and the stormwater utility pays the difference. So we raise revenue from all across the city. It's like measured in ERUs, equivalent residential unit. So one household is 1 ERU. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Yeah. So, and even like with a neighborhood, with a HOA, we'll do a cost share. So we'll look at the total impervious area in a neighborhood. And if we are 35% of the impervious in the roads, we'll pay for 35% of the project. So we'll typically take the total project cost, take the grant money off the top, look at the remainder, and then cost share based off of our impervious split.
All right.
Hey, You're
Yeah.
okay.
And-
I just was going to note, I had said that we were going to try to go back and forth between questions in the room and questions online. We've already got some on the floor, so I do want to just pull those in. The first one had to do with the timeline issue, given where we are with the door closed essentially for one funding source. And maybe we can just leave it somewhat general, or if you wanted to restate it, Carl, for the benefit of the panel.
Yeah, okay, I guess the question is, presentation makes part, all the time when it's passed for funding, whatever. That means there is no more funding. Is there an extension to that? You indicated deadlines. What's the future look like? Second, what you suggest, get it done. You have a bunch of people that aren't heroes. And you use them. Let's take the funding piece at first. Give you part about the.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. That's, I think you're picking up on the nugget of the struggle that the state's been wrestling with, is that we took advantage of ARPA and ARPA is gone. And so the future is not entirely known about what funding can be available. Right now, there's not from the state's programs from the Clean Water Initiative program. There's not a new offering or new funding on the table. But there is still in statute these grant programs, and what it needs is the vehicle of money through the Clean Water Board. So that's the piece why we emphasize the budgeting cycle and the public comment period, because that's where the board hears from the public. Hey, there's really still a construction cost need here. Can you please be sure to take that into account when you make your budget recommendation? So we are in a transition. There's not an open grant opportunity right now for folks other than the folks that did apply. But I do encourage you to voice that to the board of budget, because they're the folks that have the authority to make recommendations about how those funds get distributed. If there's a chunk of money that they assign to develop lands, that kicks us into high gear about either continuing an existing program or launching a new one based on their recommendation or guidance.
Is there anybody else on the panel or? Okay. Yeah, that is a $64 question. I guess I would just reflect on some of the things that Dave said, that there are instances for cost share, and then within, and that would be the municipality as a co-permittee, so they have skin in the game, they have some obligation. And then he also mentioned stormwater utility, and we have some folks there are some local stormwater utilities, but it isn't necessarily something that the community would want to create, but it is another funding mechanism. And it sounded like they filled in, what wasn't a municipal permitting responsibility, it wasn't responsibility of the homeowners as the homeowners association. It went to the utility as the kind of greater good for the municipality. So that was the question from this room to begin with. Nora, do you want to share one that came from online?
Yeah, I can share a question from the chat. I'm also getting still comments in the chat that people can't hear. So maybe, yeah. But since we don't have portable microphones, I've been writing what the questions were in the chat, but maybe people can speak up from the audience.
Maybe you can just repeat it.
Yeah, or we'll repeat it into the microphone. Oh, we've had a few questions in the chat about how these permits will work when there's no HOA.
Does anybody on the panel feel comfortable talking about that? Ready to dive in?
Sure. This is Kevin Burke, Stormwater Program Manager. I think it's complicated when there is no HOA. There's either the option to get, people are, I'll just step back. People are afraid of the term HOA because it often means something a lot more complicated, requirements and so forth. But, I am aware of at least, just one example in Williston, for example, where, the owners realized that there is an obligation. So they formed what was more of a legal entity, so to speak, that was more of a stormwater specific. So it basically was, the only purpose of it was to ensure that as a group, they would be able to share in the cost of being compliant with the stormwater permit. And then the town would also be co-permittee with that entity because the town had taken over the roads. Often towns, not every town deals with these situations the same. So often towns will work with homeowners to establish a maintenance agreement if they're not going to take it over entirely, such as the example in South Burlington. That's really the two options. Either some type of legal entity is formed and shared as co-permittee with a municipality, or the municipality finds a path where they would be able to take over the permit on behalf of the homeowners and recoup their cost, whether it be through a utility or a special tax district or something to that effect. So those are currently the options on the table right now.
Yeah, come up. Yeah.
And I speak pretty loud too, but is the state working on an alternative if the homeowners don't want to take an HOA? You mentioned a municipality where they volunteered to come together, but what if they say, we're not interested? We're not gonna do it, and here you got the town with the road. How do you fix that?
I think that's why we're here, to work through that. And I don't, I don't want to pretend I have all the answers to that situation because, it's not just one development in Georgia. There's several developments that fall into that category, where, the municipality is present, homeowners are present, and they're at somewhat of an impasse. So I think we're trying to, find a path forward, for those folks to essentially make it easy for them to be able to comply and get the permit coverage that's established in regulation now. So, I mean, I know there's also legislators that are present at some of these meetings, and they're interested in, not necessarily changing the law, or, if we can't meet our clean water goals this way, EPA could come down on the state and say, we need to make it up some other way and force us to do something different. Similar to what we've, heard recently on the news related to farms and the Agency of Agriculture and the relationship between DEC and Agency of Ag. But I think it's important to talk with, seek the funding, as Gianna put, and, see if there's, rather than try to change the law, find opportunities to fund to make it easier to comply with the law. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think that's why we're here, to listen.
But down it's fine, we've got the situation that here others have it. It's no easy way forward.
Yeah, and we're happy to meet individually with towns and try to think creatively, and come up with a solution. But I think it's important too to, like I said, talk to representatives and reach out to us, and we'll do our best. I don't think we're in a position to, a lot of letters were sent out and they scared a lot of people because there's language that says you've missed all the deadlines, and so forth. But I think we're really trying to work with folks, and find a path forward so that, everybody has clean title, in the interest of, anybody wants to sell or purchase a home. We don't want anybody's property to be encumbered or impacted in any way, but we also need to meet the clean water goals. So that's why we're here.
You got a tough spot. Thank you. We'll get hold of you and then see what.
Yep, that sounds good.
That last is a follow-up. I don't want to encumber us too much with the audience here versus online. Are there any questions from anybody in the room right now? There's a lot of stuff. Why don't you go, sir? Yes, please.
Okay,
And you can just grab that.
sorry, it seems like the grants and the federal money that came in is like the carrot. And then the encumbrance on the people's titles, their houses is more like the stick. Is there some sort of, I guess the reality of the situation is if you're in an area that does not have a homeowners association, you don't have anything else set up to be in compliance with this. From this day on, you're looking at years down the road before that area is going to be in compliance with it. Realistically, I mean, you're looking at, a couple of years or longer. Do we have to worry about someone coming down and saying, well, here's a fee of $10,000 for every year you don't do this? Is that something that's done historically? And if so, how is that determined?
Yeah, I think, it's specifically you're talking enforcement and how the agency would react, if years go by. I think the agency always has the tool of enforcement, to compel, any violation of environmental rule, permit, regulation. That's not, I think, the direction we're hoping to go. I think we're, particularly, I think it's different for property owners that share in a permit responsibility as opposed to a commercial property that simply is refusing to comply. I don't think we're there at a heavy-handed approach. I think we're looking to assist folks and kind of move things forward. And our intent is not to make title encumbrance the stick. It's just reality that this has come up, going all the way back to early 2000s, as Dave said, where some title attorneys didn't do due diligence and may not have found a permit on record. Others say, well, what's up with this permit? And some landowners had to file what was called a notice of deferral, which allowed for clean title to move a sale through. That was established in statute just to deal with that particular situation where we couldn't renew their permit. That is no longer an option because there is a path forward to renew the permit. So we're not trying to make that the stick, but we're just trying to find a way to not, that doesn't become an issue for property owners. So I think there's, even opportunities, we get questions now that, well, what's the status with this development's permit? We say, well, they're in the door. They've come in with an NOI or notice of intent. We know they've engaged with an engineer. They're working towards getting the permit. That sometimes goes a long way with a title attorney that's looking to move forward. And every situation is a little bit different, but I don't think we're at the point of a heavy-handed approach. We're just trying to find the right path forward for everybody's sake.
I really think people are gonna try and do the right thing anyways. I mean, people want to do the right thing, and I think that the state's heart is in the right place, trying to clean the lake up. Obviously, the federal government's got a little gun to our head on that to make sure we do it to their standards, but all right, it's a good answer.
And yeah, I'll jump into, I often get phone calls from realtors asking about the status of a stormwater permit in South Burlington. And it goes a long way if the city is working with that neighborhood.
There's a lot of questions and many comments online, and it's a little challenging to know where to begin. I may toss out some of them. Could you or someone recap the timeline of DEC reaching out to property owners? What's the timeline? I think that might be a useful thing to review.
So the timeline began in 2019 when General Permit 39050 was on public notice. So there was an opportunity for affected parties to provide public comment. So that was the first batch of letters, and then the second was 2020. When the permit was, it had been issued. So there were two letters, and then we've sent out follow-up letters for those sites that are not in compliance with the regulations, to notify them. An impetus there was certainly the funding deadlines for the POA to make sure people were aware that, they had a chance to get in the door with that. So it, again, started 2019, then 2020, and then more recently, beginning, for the most part, this year, we've sent follow-up letters to 3 acre sites.
So to clarify, the letters were sent to the property owners of record in the areas that were identified. Yeah, I just want to just pin down who received the letters, who were they addressed to? So for example, if someone has purchased a property after those letters, they would say, I never got a letter. Well, the letter was sent before they purchased the property, potentially.
Correct.
But
Yeah.
the letters did go to the property owner. You went to the town clerk.
Well, there are exceptions here, and I know there are residents of Sherwood Forest here, so that the town was notified in the instances of these permits where there was never an HOA and the town had historically been the only permittee. We had contacted the towns only in those cases. More recently, we did send letters to all residents as well as the towns in those developments.
To follow up this.
Yeah, just maybe step towards the mic, Carl.
Sorry.
If you could go up to the mic.
If you sent letters to municipalities, what did you tell the municipalities in that letter? I personally haven't seen it, but it probably is in our office, but can you tell us what direction you gave the municipality in that letter?
So the municipal letters had a list of the 3-acre sites where the town had ownership of impervious surfaces. So that could include residential subdivisions where you own the roads, or it could just be a site that the town owned the entire property. So the first letter would have said that the general permit was going on public notice. There was opportunity to comment. The second letter would have essentially said, you know, we now have a general permit in place. Your sites here are subject to the regulation. We've identified them as 3-acre sites. And then there were some links to further information to move forward, contact information within our department if you wanted to speak with someone in our program.
Just,
I'll just say thank you.
I'm going to do my best to summarize a sentiment that I'm reading in the comments, and that is related to this idea that in some way, the state of Vermont, the Agency of Natural Resources, would be imposing something on private property. So could the panel address that, put your own lens on it? If there are people that feel like what's happening to them is that the state is coming in to tell them, we're going to put this thing that is the state's on your property.
So it sounds as though that in response to the question, this is Kevin Burke, program manager with the stormwater program. It sounds as though the comment is getting at this idea that the state is, you know, I don't want to say a taking, but essentially just saying, you know, you have to do this because we tell you so. And not everybody else has to do this. I don't know if that's the sentiment that I'm getting, but it's in the situations where there are multiple property owners, the only sites that are designated are sites that have always had a stormwater discharge permit in the past. In some cases, these developments have had an Act 250 permit that the developer acquired. And Act 250 often relied upon these permits for meeting certain criteria for stormwater pollution. So I don't think there's any intent to force something that's the state's responsibility on permittees, but it's basically notifying them that you need to renew, and in order to renew, there are some new requirements in consideration of some of the state's broader clean water goals. I should add that we're talking about 3-acre sites, but there are also sites with old permits, pre-2000 permits that also need to renew their permits in perpetuity. So it's not just 3-acre sites, it's new development that need to maintain their permits in perpetuity, inspect their systems and so forth. It's just the older sites that have often little to no treatment or substandard treatment that we're asking these sites to evaluate the ability to improve treatment, not necessarily come up to the same standard as new development, but some level of treatment. And if can't do it, that's the impact fee, and really looking broader across the watershed so that impact fee can also fund other treatment in the watershed. So I don't know if that's going to get at the question, but I think it's important to understand that we're, you know, the sites that were designated are only sites that have, in terms of multi-lot development, the only sites that are designated would be those that have been previously linked by a permit in the past.
Kevin, you probably heard me before. Adam Paxman, Swanton Village. Is there, does this program distinguish between stormwater and groundwater? Why or why not? And the reason I ask is in Swanton Village, we have Jones Court, and we have a severe issue with groundwater caused by the interstate being built back in the early 60s and wetlands being created after the fact. And now we've got groundwater, and now we're dealing with stormwater. So if we can fix groundwater, we can fix the stormwater at the same time. Possible?
I think there's definitely every site's unique, and I'll kind of go back to what Andrea was saying, but often as part of solving the stormwater issue, you might be able to tackle the groundwater issue on a particular site. So there might be opportunities, if an engineer was going out to evaluate, the impervious surface and how much stormwater is estimated to be coming off the hard surfaces. They're also going to be looking broadly at where is water coming from off site. So I'm aware of at least a couple situations where we've had these conversations with consultants where they're going to look at how shallow the groundwater is. Is the interstate contributing something that is making it harder to manage the property in general, just from a water standpoint? So I think there could be an opportunity there as part of any engineering work that is done to comply with the 3-acre permit. No guarantees, every site's different. But I think, the engineers that we work with that have been doing stormwater for a long time, they look very comprehensively at these sites, want to see them at their worst and see them at their best, understand the soils, understand all of the contributions that might be coming into a site. So I think there's an opportunity there. If there's an existing problem that has existed outside of these new requirements, there could be a chance when that does go forward to look at that as well.
There's a hand up.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat about whether there's a database of stormwater permits and their expirations. And someone was saying that there may be a list of all the delinquent permits on the state website, but didn't know exactly where.
We do have a database. There's some tools online. I'd start with the Vermont Natural Resource Atlas, which is a really cool tool. It's public facing. You can turn on and off layers, including stormwater permits. It tells you which permits are issued, which ones might be expired or pending. It covers a lot of different stormwater permits besides the impervious surface permits we're talking about tonight. But it's a really useful resource. And then also on the stormwater program webpage, there's something, scroll down to the main page, there's a little guy with a magnifying glass, and we call that the environmental research tool. And that's just more of a plug in something and do a search, not that dissimilar to Google. And sometimes you're able to pull up information on a permit, see what the expiration date is, really gather all that information. And if you can't find it, you contact one of our district analysts or myself, and we'll help you find the information you need.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that since I haven't said anything. Just to plug the ANR Atlas again, maybe even someone who knows about it in chat could even provide a link. But yeah, if you're looking at a specific area like a neighborhood, you can if you scroll over and if you zoom in on the map to where you're looking for, if you're trying to find a stormwater permit for a specific area, and you go on the left side of the screen, and you scroll down, there should be a little tab called stormwater. And then you should be able to click on some stormwater permits and they'll show up as these little colored pluses on the screen. And if you click on that, you can actually pull up the actual permit document itself too. And you can see when it was, signed by the state and whoever, what responsible parties were a part of it. And you can actually read, the text, the permit is an actual, document too, an agreement between the state and the permittee. But then, of course, if you're just looking for more general information for a whole region, yeah, definitely encourage you to reach out to one of the district permit analysts like myself, and I can provide that information for you.
We had one more question. Do you spread the impact fee amongst each resident in the development? How is it collected?
To date, we have yet to collect impact fees because generally folks have been able to provide a level of treatment. But if we were to collect an impact fee, it would be from whoever is the entity applying for the permit. So that would be a group of property owners, could be also the town. Typically, if it was a single parcel with 3 or more acres of impervious, it would be much simpler. It would be that one property owner. But in the case of multiple, it would be probably a single legal entity. Unless in the case maybe with a town, it might be split based on percentage owned of impervious.
And there's a follow-up if there's not an entity, if there's no HOA.
Impact fees, just to be clear too, they wouldn't be, we wouldn't be able to issue a permit until it was received. So if we don't have a common entity applying for the permit, we're probably not at the point to collect impact fees. We'd probably be with an administratively incomplete application. So I think, kind of putting the cart before the horse, I think we need to first understand how to coordinate amongst property owners to move forward before trying to assess an impact fee.
Anyone? Okay. Yeah. Please just use the mic. Are there any funds currently available through some source where towns could hire somebody like Dave here who works for South Burlington to coordinate between the town and the folks that are having a problem with their properties? I mean, I think that's what's missing here is a resource where you give some what do you call it, resources to get the job done. That's what it amounts to. Okay. Right now, we're just sort of spinning our wheels. The town's sitting there saying, what are we supposed to do? And the homeowners are saying, boy, I don't know if we want to stick our necks out and do anything. Okay. The one that's going forward successfully, 2 people in that group sort of spearheaded their HOA, and they got people interested enough to go forward. But what we need is more things like that happening, and to have a coordinator would be useful.
I appreciate that comment, and every situation is different. We've had some consultants that have been very proactive in cases where they've been already engaged and paid for through some of that grant funding that expired today, where they've really done a lot of the legwork to be that role. But every situation is a little bit different. I think, we're trying to serve in that role to bring people together and link towns with property owners. But there's some strong opinions regarding HOAs. So we get that. But we'll take note that there seems to be a need for more resources on that front.
Yeah. I'll just say, so last Monday, Terry and myself were at a very similar meeting in the town of Richmond, who also has similar situation, residential subdivision, subject to a, past stormwater permit, now kind of falling under these 3 acre requirements. And they held a special select board meeting where they invited the residents of that subdivision to attend. And we had a whole select board meeting, or they had a whole select board meeting, just, committed to kind of talking about this issue because it's complicated and does take a lot of time to figure out and also hear from all the residents. The town of Georgia wanted to do something like that, you certainly would be able to get us in attendance if it was, you know, kind of targeted at that specific audience. And we could do something similar that we did tonight.
Thank you. I mean, I think part of this whole panel came about because we did have a select board meeting and a couple of people from Georgia that attended. Okay. And that was sort of the impetus for this because we didn't really have any answers. You know, we didn't know enough to answer their questions, like why were they being targeted in the group, what do you call it? The development next door wasn't being targeted. Okay, it wasn't on the list, the hit list. Okay, so I appreciate that, but that's sort of, I think, how we got started on this. Dean came forward and was willing to set this up, and we really appreciate it. I'm sorry I don't have more people here from Georgia at the moment to hear this. It looks like Swanton is the leading the group here so far. So anyway, thank you.
I think it's usually a good idea to end the meeting a little early rather than a little late, and have it not go on too long. We had on the agenda the goal of ending at 8:45. It's a little after that, according to the official clock over on the wall. I wanted to give the panelists a chance to say any closing remarks. It's like 30 seconds, a minute at most. I don't know. You don't have to go first, Gianna, but
I can do
you
it.
seem ready.
I'm ready. 30 seconds though, it's scary. Should I watch the clock? Did you have anything more to say or should I?
I think you can take the ball from
Are
here.
there any like last questions? If someone came to the meeting and didn't have a chance to say
Yeah,
something.
well, since you've given me that chance, but we will circulate the entire transcript from the comments made online, so you'll know those will be dropped into that folder. But yeah, if there's anybody who has a question that wasn't answered, now is your last. And if you don't have another question, we can always put it down because we'll give the questions and the comments to these folks so that you will have another bite at the apple. Okay, no one's raising their hands. I think we're gonna go to you.
Thank you, Dean. I do want to say again, thank you. It's really helpful to see you all and hear your questions and appreciate your time this evening. I was reflecting on Dean's comment over there about the sentiment about feeling like the states were pointing fingers. And I can absolutely understand why that feels that way with state regulations when it's your private property and your home. And one thing that I've been struck with by working, I've only worked at the state for 3.5 years. We just oriented a new board member last week. She used to work at the EPA, and we told her about the Clean Water Board and the initiative and the Vermont's Clean Water Act, and she was floored about how much the state is doing collectively for clean water. She goes, "You guys are special. This is outstanding what Vermont is doing." And it strikes me that when 2015, when the law passed, the saying was it's all in for clean water. And that's really hard to think about when it's like a bunch of regulations and then we're all having to do it individually. But I think it's an interesting sentiment to think there are regulations, but Vermont's also pretty special with the state commitment of funding. And that's why I get excited about working in that space. I know right now there's not an open program, but that's something I hope to take away with is that the whole state takes on this obligation and the whole state's asking that question. How do we help offset those costs? Because we all want to get to clean water for all of us. So please do comment on the clean water budget process. It's pretty unique that the state wants to fund regulatory work and puts that into statute as a grant program. So I just leave with that. We'd love to hear your voice at that process. And thanks for your time.
Sure. I don't know if I want to speak for everyone, but I just want to, say everyone who's probably on the call who's subject to these 3-acre regulations is I am your, kind of local contact. These two are my, kind of head up the program, or, the real experts. But, if you have questions that you didn't want to ask in a public forum, feel free to contact me. I'm sure my contact information has been made available, but the folks that are here, I brought my business cards. So just happy to continue to have this conversation with you all. Thanks.
Thanks, Brody. I appreciate that. I don't have a whole lot to say other than I really enjoyed just chatting with you all and trying to understand how you all feel about these new regulations. And I do get that, you know, what it might feel like when one subdivision is targeted and the one next door is not because they didn't have the same type of permit. But I'm really hopeful to see more funding come along so that, you know, we can make it easy to comply with regulations and not continue to struggle with, you know, the feeling that, you know, folks are being targeted and don't have a path forward to comply. So we'll continue to work with you, and we welcome that you contact us and get in touch so that we can help everybody move forward.
And just touching on what Carl said about feeling stuck, you know, not feeling like there's a path forward, you know, that's really a major purpose of what we do in the program to help people, assist people to comply with these regulations. So we are here for that. We're available. It doesn't mean we're personally going to be able to assist with everything, with every step. There's a role for the professional engineer, Andre, who is here tonight. There's a role for municipal officials, depending on the project. But I think, and Gianna noted, we're really in this together as a department, as an agency, and we want people to feel comfortable with reaching out to us to ask for help. And that this meeting tonight is a part of that. And, you know, we're willing to continue with that kind of assistance as needed.
I don't want to forget Andrea. So why don't you jump in, Andrea?
Thanks. Yeah, I wish I could have been there in person. I appreciate people coming out. I would encourage you all again to keep, you know, pursuing ways through this. Go to Congress. I think people are empathetic all the way from your engineers to your state regulators. Also, just as someone who deals with projects all across the state, I do think the city of South Burlington has a really great model where they're providing a lot of support. Obviously, that's a big step for smaller towns, but if you can take steps towards the towns supporting more of their residents, South Burlington seems to be ahead of the game with that. And yeah, we are here to help you as private consultants once you do have some associations formed, if that's possible.
All right. Yeah, I mean, big picture, my thoughts are, I think it pays to do the work. I think it pays off. There have been a lot of grants historically for this type of work. As you saw, there was grant money available for design. You know, the door closed on that. There was limited opportunity. So for those folks who jumped on it, you know, they're already ahead. And when construction funding comes around, they'll be potentially more, you know, ready for that money. So rather than dragging feet and, you know, trying to fight it, I think it is worth just understanding you're probably going to have to do the work anyways. You might as well just dig in, get it done, be in line for that construction funding. You know, that's just based off of what I've seen, that the neighborhoods who worked with the city proactively in the past, it totally paid off for them. And now they're not dealing with these headaches.
Thank you, all panelists. Thank you, audience. Thank you, the folks at home who are still on. I wish you all a good night. We'll send out the materials with the links to them. And this will be running, I think, on Northwest Access. We'll also make it available on YouTube for people that want to watch it again later. And this is probably not the last time that there's a meeting like this. I have an intense sense that some kind of meeting that is focused on the whole question of what is the alternative to HOA? I think that those words are really scary to people. And maybe Stormwater Management Association isn't nearly as scary if it accomplishes the same thing and doesn't involve any of the other stuff that HOAs. Anyway, again, thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.